Alrighty, yeah, so let's introduce ourselves. I'm Antonio Wolf. I'm a philosophy nerd, particularly focused on German idealist philosophy, more specifically the philosophy of G.W. of Hegel. And I suppose we're going to have a discussion here focused mostly around free will with curiosity. Is that what I should call you?
Yeah, you can call me Curiosity or Abhishek or Abhi or whatever. So, yeah, hey guys, it's Curiosity. I have a YouTube channel and I discuss mostly science and philosophy there, some reasoning and logic. Uh, I started off the channel talking about science more, but I'm more into philosophy these days, especially the last 2-3 years. I've been discussing about free will and why I think free will does not exist. So yeah, I don't have an academic and professional philosophy background. I'm all self-learned, so you might find a lot of flaws. But yeah, I think I try. That's about it.
Nah, that's interesting. Don't worry about it. I'm also self-taught. All I did was take 4 basic philosophy classes, and I mean basic. It's like introduction to classes on every branch. Well, most of the
Yeah,
branches,
me too, me too. I haven't
but the
even
rest of it is
done
just me.
specified classes on each branch, but yeah, I've done a couple of philosophy courses as well, a bit of logic course, and yeah, that's it.
Yep. So I'm not an academic either. Don't worry about it. Although, I mean, I guess I've studied the part that I study to a point where people
Really well.
think I have a degree. So,
Yeah, great,
all right,
great.
all right. Uh, well, I mean, like, let me set up how I wanted to discuss this. So,
Sure.
rather than lay out a straight argument, I do have one,
Hmm.
but it requires a lot of build-up. I just want to like set up the problem because I don't think people appreciate generally what the problem of free will actually is, which is what leads people to a confusion, which leads to weird things like libertarianism, which is unintelligible. It
Hmm.
makes like the position of determinism seem obvious and unassailable, but also be unintelligible. And then compatibilism is a position which I think you acknowledge it in from what I've seen in your channel that compatibilism is just a nonsense position with regards to the
Uh,
question because it just completely dodges it.
yeah, in the sense that it dodges it, I can say that it's. I wouldn't say that it's nonsense. There's a lot of useful stuff there, but yeah, it does dodge the actual folk notion of libertarian free will, that feeling and intuition that normal people have. So that's where I think that's kind of a clever move that they do. But yeah, there is a lot of useful stuff out there about how to organize society and criminal justice system. Uh, and
Mm.
they talk about freedom, worth, wanting, and all. Um, I quite align with that idea, but not the idea that free will doesn't exist. And people like Dan Dennett who say that we should not tell people that they don't have free will, although I secretly agree with you that we don't. Things like that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
because I think he's pretty scared about the idea that if we present before the world that if free will doesn't exist, the world will go berserk or something. I don't know how, but I disagree with that. I don't think that the world is gonna go haywire if we present the truth about free will, just like
Mm.
atheism or any other stuff for that matter.
Uh, yeah. I mean, that's kind of a silly thing. What's his name? Who's the guy who recently put out that book, The Evolutionary Biologist? Kind of
Oh,
this guy,
Robert
Russian.
Sapolsky.
Sapolsky, yeah. He put out the book,
Yeah,
and
Robert
he's like, "Well, yeah, people don't have free will, but like he says, all this really means is we got to throw all this stuff about justice out, and really, it's all should be like medicalized terminology. Obviously, we can't put
kind of, yeah.
something called responsibility on people, but we can go like, hey, this caused that, and well, if we got to poke your brain a little bit to get you to do the right things or do the things that we want to function in society, we will do so."
Exactly. So, Robert Sapolsky is not my favorite free will debater, you can say. There's a lot of useful stuff, like I say, that related to biology and neurobiology, neuropsychology that he has. But when it comes to ethics and morality, I think he doesn't have too much to offer there. And that's where I go to Greg Caruso and Dirk Pereboom, who have really useful stuff written on criminal justice system, and have the concepts of what was that, confinement. I don't remember the name. What was it during COVID? What was that term that we used to be in confinement?
Quarantine.
Yeah, exactly. Public health quarantine model. Dirk Pereboom suggests that in his books. So I'm quite aligned with those kinds of idea to give away with the concept of attitudes that we should give away with. That really makes no sense in a no free will world. But positive justice, like forward looking justice, punishments which would improve that person or improve the society as a whole, that makes sense. So not justice as a whole, like Sapolsky says, maybe, but yeah, compatibilist kind. Compatibilists have really useful uh, stuff out there when it comes to justice, but they're just not acknowledging that free will doesn't exist, or acknowledging the actual definition of free will that should be the could have done otherwise, uh, and the up to ness of that person, that person could have done otherwise, and that decision of choosing amongst alternatives was up to that person. This kind of definition they completely reject, and their notion of their definition of free will is somewhere like, if you can act in accordance with your own desires, then you're free. Then you have freedom of the will. So that's what their definition of the of free will is. And I think Antonio has some similar kind of a notion of free will.
Actually, no. One, I reject the position that freedom has anything to do with doing otherwise. Two, I
Okay.
reject the position that the will has anything to do with just achieving my desires, be they whatever they may be. And I see that this
Right.
is like one of the central problems of this issue and why this issue seems to not be answered, which is to really talk about the problem, we have to settle two things. One, what is freedom? And two, what is the will? And those are actually not straightforward. One of those is actually much harder to answer than the other because it requires basically a full deduction of the very structure of reality, both in a logical and metaphysical sense.
Right.
Because, for example, people take freedom to be freedom from, and you're like, well, I'm free insofar as I want to do something, or I have something in mind, and something out there does not stop me from engaging what it is that I want, from realizing it. So, if I desire to fly, I'm free if, like gravity does not go against me, and all these other things. If I desire
Mm-hmm.
to get with somebody, for any reason, have a relationship with them, I'm unfree if, say, my religion stops me or something else in society, or maybe my material conditions, like my economic means, I don't have, a house, whatever, I'm homeless, stops me, then I'm unfree. Uh, that's a very poor notion of freedom, and it doesn't really work. Because when you think about freedom, you have to think about like freedom not simply from limitations, because people think like, oh well, like the thing about choosing otherwise, for example. This idea comes from a belief that people have that I would ever choose to do otherwise. If you put in a situation, whatever it may be, maybe it's spurious, maybe it's something actually meaningful. Either way, you're given the conditions, not only outside of yourself, but you're given yourself as a condition. You are a certain kind of person, a certain kind of being. If you weren't a certain kind of person, you wouldn't be doing the things that you choose to do. So, given the same conditions, given the same being that you are, you should not be choosing otherwise. Not only that, there is a form of reasoning required for you to find out consciously who you really are, because you aren't just you just because you exist. The human being, as a human being, is a self-conscious, rational being that rationalizes to themselves something about not only the world, but about themselves within that world. So if you don't have that whole entire structure, you don't really have a person and you don't really have a will. So let me lay out what I take these to be. And these are assumptive in presentation, but they're actually not assumptive in deduction.
Right.
So the freedom has to be what I call, or what in this tradition is called, self-determination. Whereas determinism is a subposition of where determination, which is condition or causation, that which makes me what I am, or a thing what it is, or that moves a thing to its engagement of activity. In determinism, this is always on something else. Something else is always the reason, the cause, the condition, which determines, which pushes something to engage in a certain way towards certain ends, which are always outside of it. So, the things that come into you are outside of you, the things that come out of you are outside of you. And you yourself are in this nexus in which something outside always determines it. So, in that view, both the compatibilist position, in which, like, oh, my desires. Well, the determinist asks, well, what do you mean your desires? Those desires weren't there put by you, right? They were just there. You hunger, you're attracted to a sex, you have certain tastes, you have certain ideals. Well, did you put them there? And the determinist will say, well, obviously not. Look at the history of things and look at the conditions. You're a material being. You have a brain. There's neurons. There's evolution, which puts certain pressures, and so these things that just seem so unproblematically you are not really you. Uh, you're not the source, and that's the issue. That the determinist agrees with the libertarian that for freedom to be the case, the free being has to be the source, and that's what the compatibilists just complete dodge. That's what makes their answer really not an answer. They just assume that there's no problem with my desires and me, and that this attribution to me is just kind of supposed to be taken. Um, so you need self-determination because this chain of endless causes in determinism itself, as a chain, is not determined in the same mode as the chain is determined. So you may say, okay, everything finite is causal. So everything that's physical has some kind of like mechanical relationship to some other thing, either as a condition or a temporal cause, and all these other things. But then the relationship of causation itself is not itself determined causally. What makes causation causal is itself not causal. And if we take causation to be the absolute uh, way in which all things are determined, then whatever like causality is some high level or bottom level, whichever you want to think it, uh, domain of reality, if not the absolute domain of reality, in which we have to then pose the question, well, if causation was itself caused, like the things which are caused within its domain, then you would have just a repetition of the chain of causation. And then you still have to ask then, okay, what causes this new chain to be as it is? And eventually you have to come to terms with the fact that Whatever the ultimate determiner of reality is cannot be determined by something else. It has to be determined by itself. Whatever makes reality be real realizes itself. And this causes problems, logically speaking. It's a self-reference. It causes a paradox of like the liar's paradox. Um, but nonetheless, you have to have that. So the model of freedom that I'm going with is not a model of causation. It subordinates causation. So if you think about an organism, imagine a cycle of a plant or an animal. You have the egg, you have like the developed fetus stage, you have the born stage, the baby stage. It develops into adolescence, it grows into adulthood. There's the whether it can be asexually reproduce, sexually reproduce. It will reproduce, and the cycle starts anew. That model of a self-fulfilling cycle, which also self-reproduces, in which the reason or the cause or condition for every part of the cycle. The reason for the egg is because there were the adults that reproduce. The reason there's the adults that reproduce as well, there was the adolescent stage that grew into them. The reason there's that adolescent stage is because there was the baby stage or the infant stage, and the reason there is that is because of the egg stage and fertilized stage, and this whole circle closes. That is self-determination, because in that whole circle you don't appeal to anything else for the reason as to why that thing is the way that it is. So that's the form of freedom. Uh, there really isn't any other form that you can have that will make sense, either on a metaphysical level or a logical level. And when I speak of metaphysical, I'm not talking about magic. What I'm talking about is the structure of something real that can be that has objective structures, movements. Just the same way that you can get something physical, turn it around in certain ways, and because of the nature of what it is, there are only certain ways that you can turn it around in 3D space. There's only certain ways that it can interlock with other things. The same thing happens with the structures generally of reality, like causation. There's only certain ways they actually operate and relate to other aspects of reality in general. So that's freedom. The second question of the will is something that most people, even in the writings on free will, don't seem to ever like even think about. What is the will? And most people go, well, the will is just my desires. Well, is that true? Like, why do we have this distinction of the will if it's just desires? Why don't we just speak of desires? And I actually thought that for quite a long while. It's not until I got into Hegel that the will as a distinct idea, as a distinct concept, ever made sense. In which Hegel points out something very interesting, and it actually makes a lot of sense with at least how in the West, uh, Europe and the US and the Americas, Latin America, the way we speak of the will is very much in line with what Hegel says. And what Hegel says is this: the will is the faculty of thinking which is practical, uh, which means it is. So there's something he calls the theoretical cognition, which is the faculty of general generation of concepts within my mind, so that I receive perceptions, I generate abstractions, representations, and then in these representations, I have an order that is conceptual, that is self-determining. If I want to understand what the apple is, I have to observe it. I see its whole life cycle. I see that an apple comes from a tree. I see that the tree grows from a sapling. I see that the sapling grows from a seed. I see that the seed comes from an apple. And that is the concept that I theorize in my mind about the apple. So that's the internal representation of cognition. The will is the inverse of that, one step higher, in which the will turns around. It's cognition, it's thought that turns around upon itself and behold itself as the whole of that theoretical concept or conceiving, and takes it as immediately as it is. So when I turn upon myself, he says, and I view my whole cognition as a whole immediately, what I intuit and what I call it is the I. And you say, I am. And he says, when I do that, the I is actually this totality of the thinking being. It is my whole of theoretical cognition. And what the will does, it takes the difference between my theoretical cognition as it is in me and conceptualizes along with it the external world of objects and nature in within my mind itself. So within my mind is the difference between my mind and the world. And the will, in seeing that difference, is also the bridge of that difference. That in that I see there's a bridge between the concept in my mind and the things out there. I start engaging the way the ways to rationalize, to bring that which is within my mind out into the world objectively. So, if I want to say accomplish uh, farming, right? I need to learn what the plants I'm going to grow actually, require. I need to learn what their soil is. I need to learn, when the season to plant them is. I need to learn, how much water to use, all these things. But then once I know that, that knowledge is just, purely abstract within my mind until I will something. And to will it is to say, I want to farm. Okay, I know how to farm, or, I know how to farm. I know what I want to plant. I know the conditions. And I look at it in the world, are the conditions there? Yes. Well, then I go and plant. My will is done. I have a concept. I have objectified in the world. And if I look at the world, well, no, the conditions aren't there. Well, I have the know how to develop those conditions. Well, you don't have the right soil, where I can go somewhere else and either plant there, or I can bring soil from over there to here and do it. And that's another way in which my will is realized. And the will specifically has to do with pure concepts of reason. The will does not really have to do with mere desires, which is why it's not reducible to desires. It has to do with concepts specifically, and particularly concepts which are the general concepts like happiness, concepts like justice, goodness, all these other things. In which these are not things that I can look at in the world and observe. The way I get happiness, for example, is just this experience of pleasure generalized into a universal. And then when I say, like, my goal in life is to be happy, Hegel says that happiness is the first real concept of the will, and it's still a very abstract concept. It's not a very good one. It's very poor because happiness doesn't tell me much. You hear a lot of people nowadays have a problem in their life, and they're like, "I just want to be happy." They don't even know what that means. Because they think that happiness is just this abstract thing, when in reality, the way you get the idea of happiness is from doing a lot of concrete things, generalized into an idea, abstracted from all that pleasure and satisfaction. So, anyways, that is the basic breakdown of the will. So that once the will arises and beholds its first objects of the will, not just any desires, but now a universal thing, like not just happiness. Health, for example, is another object of the will, another concept in which I don't observe health out in the world. Health is an idea that I have originating from my mind, uh, and therefore, when I start doing things in my life to say, my end is happiness or health, I start taking immediate things like my desires. Say I want pizza, but suppose I want to be happy, and I realize, well, to be happy, I need to be healthy. Well, I can't eat pizza every day. It's not a good diet. It's going to lead to health problems, and therefore, my will actually lies in realizing health and happiness subordinate to health, or the inverse, depending which one you hold higher. Um, and that's when you start making this hierarchy of desires that a lot of people actually do have in practical living. So that the more you generalize these things, ultimately what happens with the will is that the will realizes it wants to be free. And what it knows freedom to be is essentially self-determination. But self-determination has a specific content. It's not subjective. It's not just like, well, self-determination to me is this or that. That's not what happens. The will grasps itself as the will, and here's why it's free. So if self-determination, which is a return of a thing, like in a cycle, where a frog, goes through its whole life cycle and reproduces a frog in its kind, or within its own body. The body itself is constantly regenerating itself as a whole, so that my cells are constantly being unified in the whole of my body towards the purpose of my general living as a conscious subject for my overall organic ends. That kind of self-unification and self-enclosing of the biological being is a kind of self-determination. It's a thing which produces itself as the thing that it is. So the will can behold itself as the will when it realizes that its end is freedom, and it realizes that to achieve that, it needs to have a purely independent concept of reason itself, which is to say, it must perceives itself in its own operations, sees how reasoning actually works, and comes to understand that these things actually align with the objective order of things. So, for example, if I want to know how the universe works, I better know about causation. I better know about conditions. I better know about, you know, appearances versus reality, illusions versus, facts. Those things are aspects of my pure reason. They're not just things that I observe out there in osmosis from the world empirically. It's not an empiricism. And it's also not just a given thing like rationalism. It's not an innate idea. So the will has to come to cognizance that it wants freedom. It must aim towards freedom, and it must develop its own reason to the point in which that reason fully rationalizes itself. When the will achieves that, when the will knows how it wills and what it wills in the way that it wills, then the will determines itself. The will wills itself as the will, and that is where you get free will. Now, I'm sorry that went for quite a bit, but it is a very different perspective from the usual.
That was quite something. Yeah. Was somebody else speaking?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. I hope you don't mind. I think there's a way I possibly could explain this to curiosity. Curiosity, are you familiar with the Bhagavad Gita?
Bhagavad Gita, yeah.
Okay, so think of it like the situation with Arjuna. When Arjuna doesn't want to fight, he's overcome with certain passions, like fear, for example. Now, his goal is, since he's a Kshatriya, to act according to his svabhava, let's just say his dharma, his own nature, his own being. That's when he's kind of self-determined, when he's acting according to his own being. But when other things are influencing, other passions or other desires, he's being other determined. He's not free. So freedom in this sense is when you're acting according to your own nature.
In the case of...
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, but okay, let me just respond to Antonio. Like I told you, Antonio, like most of it was it went above my head. I haven't read Hegel and all that. I haven't touched that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So what I would like to ask you first is, you said that the will is a concept of reasons. It's not just happiness, it's happiness, justice, goodness, reasoning and stuff, right? Reasoning, logic, it includes everything. It's not just basic happiness. It includes everything. So one of them is reasons, to act according to reasons, right? All right, but why would you act according to reasons is actually determined? I can't see freedom there. Like, for example, we know that 1 plus 1 equals 2. Are we free to not believe that? Or are we free to believe that 1 plus 1 equals 3 once we have believed that? Once we know that 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, we can't believe that 1 plus 1 equals 3. We're not free there. So in reasoning and logic itself is a deterministic process. You don't have the freedom to believe otherwise or choose otherwise. For example, believe in God itself. You know about the concept of Pascal's wager,
Yeah.
right? Even if we don't believe in, even if we don't have reasons to believe in God, they said that you have free will, you can believe in God, but it's just not possible. We can't choose what we believe in. We can't choose our desires. So in that sense, I don't understand how that, and the concept of freedom that you first alluded to, self-determination, chain of causes which is itself not determined, kind of causa sui, causation. Is that what you're saying? It's that
Yeah,
self-determination is
it is
causa
a
sui?
causa sui. Yeah, but it's not an immediate causa sui. You don't just say it. There is actually a proof of it.
Right. I want to know more about the self-determination thing that you were saying. First of all, like I said, reasons, happiness, and all, we're just slaves to our desires and reasons. Desires are like we are slaves to hunger. We are
Can you
slaves
let me
to the.
respond to the first thing so
Yeah,
we don't get lost in too
sure,
many.
sure,
So
sure,
in
yeah.
response to the issue of like, well, if 1 plus 1 is 2, and I'm not free to believe that 1 plus 1 is 3, how can that be freedom? Well, what's the freedom of believing that 1 plus 1 is 3? Suppose that, let's take a more real example. There's a berry. Actually, I was hiking last year somewhere, and there was these bushes, and I wondered if they were poisonous or not. Knowing that those berries are poisonous, which I did, I checked before I bothered tasting them. Obviously, even then, I wasn't exactly sure. I found this stuff on Google, and I'm like, it kind of sort of looks like edible, but not gonna chance it. And then I finally found the exact thing. The exact thing was like, no, this stuff is poisonous. It ain't gonna kill you, but it's gonna give you a bad stomach ache. Me knowing that and acknowledging, yes, the thing is poisonous. If I eat it, I will have a bad time. That is not unfreedom. That is freedom. If I thought that being free was ignoring the reality of things and going against it and, still eating it and, being stupid and harming myself, knowing that the thing is poisonous and say like, well, I'm a free being, I can fuck myself up. Under no view of freedom from anybody can anybody say that's actually like a genuine use of freedom. People will say, you're out of your mind. They'll say you're insane. You're not being a rational person. You're not actually being free.
Right. So, for example, take a person who actually eats the berries and is irrational. Is that person also free?
No, I mean, that's why, because they're being irrational. How can you be free if you know the thing is poisonous and yet you go against it? Why in the world would anybody who knows something is poisonous and is eating it because they're like, well, I want to engage pleasure, knowing that the consequence is not pleasure, even if the thing tastes good, they might be sweet. There are berries that there are things that we know that taste good, but they're bad for us. They're poisonous. Even if you're saying like, oh, my only goal right now is happiness, and happiness is pleasure, and pleasure is going to be me eating the sweet berry, but I know it's poisonous, and I go ahead and eat it anyways. I've literally destroyed my future capacities and my immediate capacities right after eating it. I'll have a bad stomach ache. In engaging in the very thing that I claim to be engaging, I engage a contradiction. I say I want pee, and then I do not pee, basically. I mean, how can that be freedom? Under what sense of freedom does that fall?
Right. So, I will have to go to neuropsychology and neurophysiology now. And now that we know scientifically that brain is what produces thoughts, right?
Well, we don't know that.
So
That's actually not established.
we do
That's
like
an assumption. No, we do not know that. there's a correlation, but that is not established. There is no knowledge that we have about where consciousness comes from. We don't know if the brain receives it and limits it, or if the brain produces it. Something like NDEs, near-death experiences or mystical experiences, provide evidence for a reason to think that this is not a settled thing. So it's not settled.
Right. I now think that yours is also a kind of compatibilist free will. For example, if you can act according to reasons, then you are free. Like, if you are convinced that the earth is flat and you had no freedom in not believing that the earth is flat and no freedom to believe or know otherwise, you're just forced to believe that the earth is flat, then you're seeing that you're actually free.
No.
It's freedom of the will.
No.
Okay. Can you
this has to
explain
do with like full, like, true thoughts. The things that I have in my head, just because they're in my head, beliefs, do not constitute my will or my knowledge. I may believe the earth is flat. I may even believe I have a chain of justifications for why the earth is flat. But if the earth is not flat, and if proper rational investigation will actually lead me to conclude that it isn't, and yet out of some kind of cognitive deficiency of my own, or whether I just will myself out of some kind of fervor or frenzy, I want to fit in with some people, or I just want to delude myself. I'm not free. And in the case of somebody who just gets into that, they just will, they're just kind of not a very scientifically literate person. They get into that, and it makes sense to them. In the way in that it makes sense to them, we can say they freely engaged getting into that, but being in that does not make them free. Just like how we can say people choose to get into addictions, all these things, or you could more often people fall into them, quote unquote, but they're well aware that they're falling into it, and obviously getting into it, you're no longer free, and even they don't feel themselves as free. So in the case of mere beliefs, however, indeed, they're unfree, and you can't say they're forced upon you, because they're not. So, for example, the flat earther, nobody puts a gun to their head and said, "You better believe in the flat Earth." Even if somebody does
that exactly sounds like compatibilist free will, because compatibilist free will is actually freedom from external impediments, but internal impediments, they don't care about it. Even if, for example, if you have a tumor in your brain and you act because of that tumor, the tumor determines what you do. For example, if you're a pedophile or something because of that tumor, then the compatibilist would actually agree that he's not free, but that tumor itself, the reduced versions of the tumor, is what we call the brain. Like,
right, and
for example,
I would say that person's not free.
The tumor.
So in this case, I would disagree.
Just like that person is not free. Yeah. Just like that person is not free, we are not free either, because everything is just a tumor. It's just tumor all the way down. So
Not in this
suppose the
case.
tumor is 100%. Yeah, tumor is 100% with the person who is a pedophile. Take that down, for example, take it as 50%. Is that person free? Take it as 25, 20, 15, 10. Where does freedom arise there? Do you have a line where you can draw where freedom pops out into existence? What I'm saying is that our brain itself is a tumor, is a reduced version of that tumor.
You can't really make that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. I would just say, well, one, my position is not the compatibilist position. They can't really be compared in that way, because I do, unlike the compatibilist who does not acknowledge internal impediments, I do. The desires in me, just because they're in me, are not to be considered mine. Like I said, like the example of health, I may desire to eat pizza, but I know, that for my health, my ultimate highest good, which I value, I should not be eating pizza every day. we got to get fat, all these health conditions, whatnot. So me following my desire is actually not realizing my will. My will is health. My will is happiness. My will is goodness. It's not these immediate desires. Only insofar as these desires actually fit these universal self-determined ends, because that's why these are self-determined as opposed to just the desires that are in me. The desires are in me, yeah, they're just there. It's just like how, if you're a guy, you're attracted to women. If you're a woman, you're generally attracted to guys. You don't do anything for that. You didn't choose it. It's just there.
I
The same
basically
way.
see it as hierarchy of desires, like first order, second order, like orders of desires may be there. So you are actually saying that reasoning or rationality itself is
Is a desire.
different from desires. Is a
I
desire
would say,
itself, right? And do you agree
I
with
would
that?
say, I say one, it's different from desires, but it also is itself a desire.
Yeah,
Like you and I, for example, are having a discussion because we desire rationality. We desire comprehension.
exactly. It's all
And I would
desires
say,
all the way down. Like I say, it's
no,
all tumor all the way
it's
down.
not all desires all the way down, because reason is a desire which desires a specific kind of thing, and it's not general desire. So when you're an animal, for example, you have a desire of, like the animal wants, it sees like a bunch of food, and it wants, the meat, or it wants, the bread or whatever. And I don't know if you've ever seen this, that you put a dog with something that it really wants both, and it literally just gets locked up between like running back and forth, because it can't make up its mind what it wants. It goes like, "Ooh, I want this," and then
Yeah.
immediately like, "But wait, that's over there," and he starts running and he goes crazy.
Mhm.
The human being and reason is not like that. When you actually have the will, you don't suffer that whole indecision of like, I'm being pulled here, I'm being pushed there. You're not. Your will is the one that directs. Your reason, you have a rational goal that directs all your actions. That is a difference between the generality of desire and the will as a cognitive thing. Desire is not cognitive, but the will is. The will is a form of cognition. And it's, as a form of cognition, it is its own end. So something like goodness does not arise simply as a given. Goodness arises in the end through a fully rationalized understanding of reason itself. What makes the will unique and fully self-determined, unlike other things, which are always other determined. My desire is other determined by and large. It's just there. It impinges upon my mind, upon myself. And sometimes I have strong desires, sometimes I have weak desires, and but nonetheless, if I have a will, even though I have strong desires, you can be really mad, or you can be like really sexually attracted to people who you should not be, who may be married, and yet you can go, like, okay, I understand, like I have this desire, but my reason tells me otherwise, and I will go with my reason because that is what I really am. That is who I really am as a human being. I am not just an animal to be pulled hither and thither.
From what
Now,
I can see is that you have a particular definition of freedom that most others won't agree with.
they're just wrong
For example,
because they don't make sense.
For example, okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
let me just give you an example. Suppose someone is standing on a cliff and is deciding between whether to jump or not, and he has a reason to not jump. Is he free to jump
No, well, you
when
have
he
to
has a
ask,
reason, strong
did
reason
he
not to
give
jump?
themselves? Well, you have to ask, did he give himself that reason, or is he just taking that reason as given? If he just taking that reason as given, it's no different than just like the desire that's just there. It's just like a religious person. A religious person grows up in their culture and religion, and they just believe things because that's all they've ever known. So they were given their belief in God. They were given their belief in doctrines. They're like, you need to pray to God in this way. You need to do these rituals. You can't do this or that. It's bad. Why? Because, the Bible or whatever the holy book says so. You need to go do this with the priest, whatever. And so you just do that. The person just does that. Now, they believe that. That is a belief. And they use that belief as a reason leading to other things, because then they base their thinking around those given beliefs. But those beliefs are themselves irrational. They're no more rational than, you being attracted to whatever, or, desiring whatever for lunch. So long as a person does not fully understand why they really think so, why they really think things all the way down, and I don't mean just relatively. Like the demand really is very strong. It's not just a relative demand of like, I need to know immediately, like, what is my immediate reason? So, like I want pizza. Well, why? Because I'm hungry. And I'm hungry. Why? Well, because I'm an animal. And if I end right there, that's not a full chain of justification. I don't fully understand what my reality is. I'm just taking it as a given. I take it as a given that, science tells me this or that. I take it as a given that, the categories of reality involve causality and all this stuff. That person may be more rational than, say, somebody who doesn't think at all. Maybe more rational than the religious person because they have they have longer chains of justification, and more advanced processes of reasoning. But they themselves do not get to the point in which they've cognized their own will, their own rational process, to understand how it really works and what justifies the rational process to itself.
So according to your definition of the self-determined freedom or something, we know that according to that definition, 99.9999999% of all people don't have free will. It's just this fringe minority of 0.001 or something that you're saying have free will, which I don't agree with either. Even
See, I
those
have
people.
Yeah, I would push back. I have it's gradients. There's levels of will, more or less. Some people have a very high level of will. Some people have a lower level of will. The human being as a human being generally has a will, unless somebody has severe cognitive deficiency.
Okay, the will is there, but is it free? Can you break the causal
Yes,
nexus?
the will is free. Yeah, the will is free. Because
I don't agree with that.
to be a
You
thinking,
can't break the causal nexus. You are determined. Okay, let's just set aside indeterminacy here.
Yeah,
because
we can
even
actually talk
if
about
it's
this, by the way.
indeterminate.
Yeah, we can talk about the causal nexus. I have an answer for that.
All right. So setting aside indeterminacy here, let's assume that the world is deterministic. Even in a deterministic world, how can you break free of the causal nexus? Where can you break free of the causal nexus?
Every person who thinks has already broken free of the causal nexus. To think is already to think on a level that is not natural. It has nothing to do with physics. The relationship of thinking and neurons is literally the relationship of the alphabet to words. And, in English, we have, the 26 letters of the English alphabet. With those letters, they enable, and this is a very important difference, determining, which are, the things that which will condition and cause other things to be the way they are, and enabling conditions. Language, for example, or the alphabet, let's say it, is not a determining condition upon what appears in written language. It is an enabling condition. It allows new things to appear. And you can arrange the letters in the alphabet and create new words. You can put them in novel ways within sentences. Just because you have 26 letters does not lead you to necessarily write Shakespeare or write, some really silly post on the internet or, write a bunch of gobbledygook nonsense. The alphabet does nothing. The alphabet just enables that arrangement to happen. But it does not determine that the arrangement should happen in any certain way. In the same way, the neurological and physical factors of the universe as a whole enable the faculties of thought, but have nothing to do with the ways in which the faculties of thought, as the faculty of thought, comes together and determines itself, just in the same way that language is not really determined by the alphabet.
But don't you agree that, okay, I didn't understand what you said. Can you repeat that?
All right. So the physical factors of the universe, the laws of physics, spatial temporality, causality, chemistry, all these things. They're like, the analogy that I would make is like the alphabet. In English, we have the alphabet, and just because we have 26 letters, those 26 letters being there do not determine what I will write with the 26 letters. They don't determine the contents of writing. They only determine
They
the ways.
themselves don't determine, but there are other determining factors out there. Like
Yeah, the
the
determining
mind
factor of
itself.
what appears. Yeah, exactly. The determining factor about how the letters are arranged comes from the mind. I have a meaning. I use the words to express that meaning. The words don't determine my thought. My thought determines the word. The letters. The same way, concepts.
Yeah, but your thought
Concepts.
itself, but your thought itself is a process of mysterious causal processes happening in the background
No, it isn't.
that you're not aware of.
No, it isn't. I'm fully aware of what my thought actually is. For example, let me give you an example.
You're aware of your thought, but you don't know how your thoughts are made.
No, I actually do.
Do you know how your thoughts are made?
Yes,
How
I
are
do.
thoughts arising into consciousness? Do you know that? Are you aware of that?
The
Do you know
question of
process
how a
behind that?
thought is determined as a thought is the only one that
Yeah, but
matters.
you're
You're
not
asking a
free to
question
choose your
which
thoughts.
I am free to choose my thoughts. I'm the one who determines them. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an
Okay,
example.
wait. Let me give you an example first.
Okay.
Uh, have you ever meditated or something?
Yep.
Or have
I've
you?
actually been doing that for the last few days.
Okay. Great. When you're meditating, you know that your thoughts are just popping into consciousness rather than you creating by some strange kind of methodology that is outside causality. Don't you agree with that?
I don't really think when I meditate.
I don't understand. Like when you meditate, what kind of meditation?
So when I
are you into?
meditate, I may have imaginations, but I don't really have thoughts.
Okay, even the imaginations. Do you know how they were produced? You're
They're
not
just
aware
popping
of
into
how
my
those
mind, and I don't pay attention. They don't
exactly
determine what's going on.
and the popping into mind, that process itself is what I'm alluding to as deterministic process. Something mysterious going on in the background. It's
Yeah,
pretty much
but
compatible with someone, a simulation someone is writing, and you're just a slave to witnessing all those thoughts. Somebody's putting some code out there, and it's coming out as thoughts in your consciousness. But are you that simulator? Are you in control of that simulator? No. You don't know how your thoughts are created and are coming into
see, I
existence
would
in
say
your
that's a bad
consciousness.
example. Like, if I may push back, I would just say that's a bad example. Because one, in meditation, I have no purpose to actually think anything. Imaginations pop in my head. I am not paying attention to them. The whole purpose of meditation is, okay, I see it, I ignore it. I don't care. It doesn't determine me. So it has no determining power. I keep on meditating, I keep on ignoring it. When I'm thinking,
So what I'm saying is that the phenomenology of thoughts coming into consciousness is the same as every thought that comes into consciousness, but
it's
just
not.
that you are in an illusion of thinking without knowing that you're thinking. Like you're thinking, but you are completely unaware that you're thinking. Thoughts are just coming and popping into existence, and you think you're in control of them, but it's the same process going on with all thoughts that come into your consciousness. They are just coming from the background. You don't know the causes behind. Like there are scientific ontological causes behind them, sure, but you're not aware of them. And when you're not aware of all the physiological and psychological causes that are the result of your thoughts, how can you be free?
Well, again, I repeat, the example you gave is not a good example, because in meditation, I have no intent to think anything. That things pop in my mind determine nothing. They proceed, they come in and they leave. That's it. It's like an itch. It
Oh,
comes and
but
it goes, and it
what
has nothing
about
to do with my life.
what about complex rationalizations like you're deciding which job you want to go to? Even those thoughts that come to you, you're not free to choose those. They're just
Well,
coming to you
yes. Okay.
because
Again,
of reasons outside your control,
again,
causes outside your
again.
control.
Yeah. So I think something must have been missed out early in the discussion. Remember when I said that the issue cannot really be about choosing otherwise. There is no reason you could ever give for choosing otherwise. If you chose otherwise, what reason do you have? If you say, look, I'm free because I could choose otherwise. Tomorrow I can stop being Abishek, and I can, decide I'm Antonio, and I will start living like Antonio. Other people will see you and say, Abishek, you've gone crazy. What's wrong with you? You're not yourself. Because guess what? Abishek is not the kind of person who just wakes up one day and decides to be another person. Because that's not who you are. That doesn't make any sense. That's not rational. That's not free. That's what an insane person does. So the choice thing is an illusion. It's a red herring on the issue. It has nothing to do with it. Because when you're free, there actually is only one choice. You don't have this openness of choices.
That's what it's really counterintuitive. How can a freedom be just one choice? If you're determined,
Well, how can freedom be many choices?
choice.
Think about it. I gave you the example. What does choice have to do with freedom? Why would you choose otherwise? People say, well, I know what you're saying. This is a common view, but it makes no sense. It has no intelligibility. And it's just people being confused because they view freedom as something free from limitation, but they don't have a positive view about what that actually is. So they get rid of the limitations and then they pretend that there's something there, but they don't have anything there. And they're like, well, I could decide X and Y. Why would you? If you decide for no reason, or if you go against everything that you were your entire life, the only thing that shows that you're crazy. It doesn't show that you're free.
So, like I said, suppose someone is convinced of the problem of evil as a good argument against God, and they're convinced by it. They're just persuaded by that argument. How can that person at that same time be free to believe in God?
Well, okay, again, you're making choice be something disconnected from being a certain kind of being already. You can't be free and be nothing. That's impossible. If you have nothing, you're going to do nothing. There's no reason to choose. And if you just choose randomly, that's not a choice. That's just being crazy. That's being irrational. That's just being a blind bunch of billiards. There is no choice there. Choice belongs only to a rational deliberation. And a rational deliberation only belongs to a certain person who is a kind of person. They're not an abstract person. Because if you get rid, for example, of your emotions and you say, oh, I'm perfectly rational. I have no desires impinging upon my thinking. Why would you choose anything? Think like, right? It doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't choose, oh, I'm going to choose to be a doctor. Why? You don't have any feelings. Nothing draws you to it. You're not part of this world. You're not part of the nexus. You don't have hunger. You don't have anything that pushes you to consider anything. You have no reason to choose anything. You would not choose anything. You would just be there, do nothing. You understand like that problem? Like the way that it's set up is impossible.
I still don't understand your definition of freedom and why should that be called freedom? How is that freedom? Can't make sense of that.
Okay. So self-determination is freedom because one, it cashes out the intuition people have that freedom is self-originating, causa sui. Two, it catches out the notion that people have that freedom is freedom from other things, because in being my cause of myself as a specific kind of being, other things aren't the cause of me. Now, they can be enabling conditions, like the example of the alphabet and what I write with it. The alphabet enables me. Physics enables me, but physics, it does not determine what I think.
It
That the
does.
sun has a sun flare, tomorrow is not going to determine the way I think, other than like I may be aware there's a sun flare and I'll be like, oh man, maybe I'm a person in the forest who's never seen technology and doesn't know many things, and like you might see effects from that. You're like, oh, the gods are angry. That's the only effect it's going to have. It's not going to make me think anything. It's going to only impinge upon me, my rational process work in a completely different way. Because when I think, I do not think in atoms. When I think in meaning. When I think, you tell me something is
Right.
You know,
And that's the illusion of free will.
that's not illusion.
You-
That is not an illusion. See, that's backwards.
That exactly is the illusion. Okay,
See,
let me explain.
Actually, let me explain so that you understand where I'm coming from.
Okay.
So you're saying that's an illusion of freedom. Well, you
Right.
have a thing, suppose you have a Lego, and Legos, they only have a certain shape. They come together only in certain ways. That's not a limitation. Like you might say like, oh, Legos suck because, I can't build just whatever I want. I'm stuck with like the bricks and I can only make certain shapes and all these other things. And you may think that's on freedom. But that's like saying, well, look, I'm unfree because, when I'm building my house, I only actually have so many materials, and I have to go with those materials to shape what it is that I want. Well, that's not a limitation. That's a limitation only insofar as you think that you ought to be able to just make your will like magic over anything. But the reality is that you are a specific kind of being. Like for your human being, for example, you already reason, by the nature of it. You grow up in society and you're unculturated and you develop rational capacities. You have imaginations of a certain cultural kind. You don't just imagine just what is in nature. You imagine things that don't even exist. You use the stuff, like with the Legos, and you can make the statues of just about, so long as you have enough Lego blocks and enough time and creativity, you can do it. The Lego blocks enable you to do things. They don't limit you. Your body enables you to do things. It does not limit you. Rather than like being something from outside, because what you're saying is you're talking about these as things like forcing me from outside, but this is not a force from outside. This is me. This is how I actually am. This is how
But
I
these are
can be.
forces from inside. These are forces from inside. You
They're not,
didn't choose your genes, your parents, your circumstances,
and those have nothing to,
your
well, yeah, but what does that
upbringing.
have to do with anything? See, those things have nothing to do with it.
It really it does have to do with everything. If
No,
you're
it doesn't.
wait, let me explain. Whether you're a rational person or not has everything to do with what your causal history has been. Your
Yes, it does.
parents,
I
your
grew up.
genes, your upbringing.
I grew up. Yeah. I grew up in a very irrational society. So have you. My parents don't even understand anything that I'm into. No teacher ever taught me these things. I'm just a curious person
Exactly. Same here.
who ended up getting stuck with all these things. The causal history enabled me, but it did not cause me to be this way. It did not cause my thoughts, like physically. Now, there's an order of thoughts, which also has a relationship. Some of it is causal, some of it is self-determining. Like within self-determination is causation. Like it's not magic, but it is a different order of determination in which the appeal cannot be made to anything else. When it comes to let me give you an example, because this is what I was going to do earlier. Okay. Consider something that is absolutely immediate. And immediacy just means, without middle, without relationships, because a middle would be anything that mediates. So, this something would not have something inside, because that would be a relationship, a mediation with some kind of form, a content with a form. It can't have a boundary. That would be a mediation between an inner and an outer. It can't have an outside. That would be a mediation of another kind. It can't have a relationship between it and me, because that would be a mediation. What is that? When you're given that structure, what does that mean?
I didn't get.
Like,
I mean, you can say what that is. I mean, for example, what's an example for that? Immediate.
well, so I'll tell you what it is. Nothing. It's nothing. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
It has no inner.
You're
It
saying
has
that
no
everything
outer.
is
It has
connected,
no.
right?
Yeah. It's something that literally is a whole bunch of nothing. Now, when you think that, how do you actually think that? Is it because you actually understood the meaning, which is what I do. I comprehend meaning. I'm like, oh, I get what that is. I understand it as a concept. I think about it as a concept. I think. Or is it, or are you going to like say that actually no, the reason you think that is because of the neurons in your brain? Which I think you'd probably like to want to say.
Well, yeah, I don't even have to allude to the neurons and stuff. I'm someone who sometimes experience the subjective nature of free will not existing, of non-free will. I can experience it sometimes. So that's some useful contribution from Eastern philosophy, for example, say Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta of Indian philosophy,
Are
which
you
are
referring to
non-dualistic.
Yeah. Are you referring to like
Mhm.
a mystical non-dual experience where the self disappears?
Yeah, right, something like that.
Okay,
Self
I would
doesn't
classify
exist,
that actually as
and
perfect
that can
freedom.
experience as well. Okay, you are classing. Okay, that's where the distinction lies between you and me. I think your definition of freedom is
I mean, isn't that
which
class as freedom by
classic freedom
Indian
that most
Vedantists
people.
at the same time? Because something like that's liberation. That is freedom. You're liberated
Okay,
from
in
samsara.
that way, if is that how you have been using the word self-determination, liberation, freedom?
No, I've been using it exactly in the way I told you. But from my view,
Okay.
that which you describe also counts. It's a really poor kind of freedom, but it is freedom.
Okay, that's your kind of freedom. But most people on earth, the freedom that matters for them is this freedom to do otherwise
But
and
they don't
to
have
be
that
free
freedom, and
from
it's nonsense.
causality. So you're kind of agreeing with me. And when we want to build a society and a justice system surrounding that, I think the definition of freedom that we rather would use is this folk definition, that the freedom to otherwise and this
No, you
uptoness
can't use a
to
folk
actions.
definition. Look, because the folk people, they have something true. They have it's true. It must be causa sui. It's true. It must be freedom from. What they're lacking is it has to be freedom for, and has to be a specific freedom. It can't just be this general abstraction, because to be is not to be a general abstraction. That's the reality. That regular people are confused is nothing new. I mean, it's pretty well known in Eastern Chinese and as well as Indian thought. I mean, obviously, the average person thinks that they're fine. They're fine being trapped in samsara, but the yogi and the mystic knows no, they're the fools. They're the ones who are unfree. That in the fact that they think that they're free, they're actually not free, because they're slaves to all these illusions. They have these desires in their treadmill, and the real freedom is to extricate yourself from that through enlightenment, and get out of it. They at least understand that
Okay,
the real freedom has to be causa sui. And when you're functioning in society,
let me
yeah, let
let
me
me
finish
put
this
out
thought.
a reductive. Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah, let me finish this thought, since you mentioned society. So when you're working with society, you don't want to work with a layperson's view. You want to work something that includes the layperson's essential view while getting rid of their confusion. My view includes their view and gets rid of the confusion. It says, yes, what you think the commitments you have about free will of being absolute in causa sui is right. The commitments you have on it about being freedom from is a right. You're just missing. There must be a freedom for, and it must be a specific kind of freedom, and therefore cannot be an abstraction. And therefore, once you understand it, and you can get most people to admit this, because they're confused. But once you talk about them, talk about this to them, they will all say, yeah, that whole thing about freedom to choose abstractly doesn't make any sense. I wouldn't wake up tomorrow and decide that I'm going to just like murder my friends. I'm not the kind of person who does it. I don't want that. And to say that I'm not
Yeah,
free because I
and you're
don't
not
want to murder my
free.
friends, yeah, that doesn't make any sense to them. Like, if you made that argument to them, like, look, you're not free because tomorrow you can't decide to wake up and murder your friends, and they're like, yeah, you're crazy. So
See, I understand the distinction between a rational person and an irrational person, although you can straight away draw lines from, but there's a gradation to rationality, right?
yeah.
But freedom does require this ability. Okay, let me give you the example of that tumor person again. That tumor person, you agree, doesn't have freedom, doesn't have free will, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So just reduce it. Keep reducing that tumor. Where does the freedom come about?
The freedom comes about when the person rationally beholds the contents of their mind and the contents of the world, has a rational principle, purely rational principle, which orders all their actions, the principle of the good, for example. And it has to be one of these. It can't be like, oh, I want pizza. That's not a rational principle. A rational principle is an a priori principle like health, the good, beauty, truth, whatever. Those kinds of things. A person who does that measures, okay, I know this, I know the truth, I know how the world works. And they're like, I suddenly have uncontrollable rage and I feel like murdering my wife. Now, that person, if that rational process does not kick in, if like they just go directly to like, I just suddenly have rage and they just unconsciously just go haywire, they kill, their family. One, that person is not free. Now, the other person might have the rational process may appear and they're like, this rage has overcome me. I'm aware. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. But my body's moving on its own. That person has free will, but now like their freedom is not engaged in their body. They've literally lost control of their body. Sometimes that happens. People, their body kind of like goes out of their control. But their rational mind is still there. So that person has free will, yes, but they can't realize it. They cannot actualize the will because they've lost control of the body. And then there's another person who they've have that tumor, it's like 25% or whatever, say 10%, something manageable. It causes intense rage. And they're like, oh my God, I suddenly feel this intense rage. Why? And they inquire rationally, look, I love my family. I love, my neighbors. I love goodness. I love truth. This rage comes from nowhere. It makes me just look at, the immediate person right next to me and I want to kill them. And then they'll go like, this isn't normal. They're like, I'm going to, do the rational thing. I'm going to exert my will. I'm going to get away from people. I don't want to put them in danger. Going to lock myself in the room, call, the hospital or something and say, hey, something very weird is going on. I have this intense rage. I can't, it seems like almost uncontrollable. Please come get me. Please put me in a ward. That person has free will. They see the options of action between what is true and what is false, between the rational and the irrational. And they go with what they know always to be the case, which is their rationality. That person has freedom. That person has free will.
You see, I understand the distinction between irrational and rational, but rationality is not something that gives you freedom of the will. Your will is never free. You can't break free of
yes, it is.
Nexus, right?
Okay, no, again, yes, it does. Freedom is not a thing other than being. An atom is a self-making thing to a certain extent. It comes together because of the forces within matter itself, according to matter itself, which unifies itself into atoms. Elements, through the chemical process, bring themselves through the chemical process inherent in matter to unify into elements, and so on and so on. The rational person, as rational, also at the level of rationality, brings himself into a certain kind of self-unity of its own kind. To say that this isn't free is basically saying that freedom is non-being, that freedom is irrationality, because you keep bringing this thing like, but if things are this way, and I can't go against the way things are.
The distinction between you and me here is the definition of freedom itself, okay? So
yeah, my freedom makes sense. Your freedom does not. I think I've shown multiple times that your freedom does not make any sense.
Not at all. Not at all. What you're saying is that rationality, a simplification of your kind of freedom is that rationality is freedom. But that
No, it's not just
person
rationality. It's
wait
not
wait
just
wait
rationality. It's reality. Let me finish. Let me finish the point because I want you to
let me
understand.
complete let me complete.
No,
So
because you're
suppose a
going off on
person
something
is
let me.
rational.
No, okay, but
A
you're
person is
misunderstanding what I'm
rational
saying.
does not mean, okay, let me just complete this.
Abishek, but you're
Let me just
misunderstanding
complete
what I
this.
said. But okay, but
That a
if I let you
person is
complete it, you're going by
rational.
something that I did not say. How should I let you finish something that I did not say? You're misconstruing my position.
Okay, yeah, I'll let you complete your position.
Okay, so
Go
you're
ahead.
making a distinction here between reason and reality. I make no such distinction. You're saying to me what you're saying is the equivalent of I'm unfree because I cannot go against my own reality. To which I would respond, you're crazy. Why would you want to go against your reality? That's like suicide. You're going to destroy yourself. How can freedom be self-destruction? Because when I understand things, I understand the reality of what things really are. I'm not making things up in my mind. I'm free because I know how my brain works. I'm free because I know how my psychology works. I'm free because I know who my family and friends are. I'm free because I know what I do in my regular life. I remember my past,
It's
for the last
all a
20
process
years.
of your wiring. It's all a consequence of your
Okay,
wiring
but
of
if you
your
but if you went
constitutive.
against again, if you went against your wiring, how would you be free? If you go and if you say that, oh, I'm free if I can say fuck you, brain. What are you going to do, Abishek? You're
Yeah,
going to
that's what
kill
I'm saying.
yourself.
That's
You're
impossible.
going to destroy
That's
yourself.
impossible.
No,
That's
it's not about
impossible to
impossibility.
go.
Yeah, it's not okay, but you're
You
misunderstanding.
can't
It's not
achieve
about
freedom.
impossibility. You can.
Okay,
What do you mean you can't achieve
let
freedom?
me.
Okay, again, you keep
Are
misconstruing
you
freedom
talking
as
about
something other than reality.
liberation? The Eastern liberation kind of thing. That freedom is achievable. Okay, I understand. I agree, but not
No,
your kind
absolute
of
freedom is
freedom,
achievable.
and not even the freedom that is worth wanting, because that a person is rational itself is a lucky or unlucky feature of that person. And to hold someone accountable for something lucky or unlucky that happened to that person doesn't make sense. And whenever
Well,
someone is rational and acts according to valid reasons, he is lucky to do that. It's either constitutive luck or it's present luck, or a combination of both. It's
I
either
would deny it.
nature or nurture and a combination of both.
I deny it.
That you're a reasonable person, that you're a rational person is the causal consequence of factors and processes that you did not control and you were not aware of. How could you call something as freedom if you don't control the process?
You can. Okay,
You
every
can't.
person, Abhishek, every person in this world who is not cognitively deficient, they don't have something wrong with their brain, understands the value of truth. Everybody wants truth. This is why, like religious people and scientific people, crazy people, everybody wants to claim truth. They understand the value of it.
They are
They
slaves to
understand.
truth. They don't have
Well,
freedom. They are slaves.
you cannot be slaves to truth. Truth is what enables you to exist. Truth is being itself. The thing that you
You
just
did
said
not
is literally
choose.
insanity. No, but
You did
Abhishek, the thing
not
that you just
choose
said.
that truth is something reliable. You did not choose that. Truth is reliable, but you did not choose
But
that. If you
why
did
would you
not choose
choose
that,
that?
how were you free?
Abhishek, it has nothing to do with choice.
That's what I'm saying. Freedom of the
Abhishek,
will makes
the
no sense.
choice.
That's why you can't choose it.
No, Abhishek, choice, as you're putting it, doesn't make any sense. It's your concept that doesn't make sense. It's not freedom. See, when you make up a concept that doesn't make any sense, you can't say, the thing I'm talking about, which other people talk about, that's just not real because the way I formulate it makes it impossible. Well, yes, you have a wrong view because you're talking about something not real. So you can't say freedom has failed. The only thing you can say is my concept of freedom has failed. Because if I define something against reality, whose problem is that? My problem. That shows that I have some kind of lack of understanding. If I don't understand how the world really works, if I don't understand how meaning actually works on the conceptual level, I can't blame my failure on the thing. It's just a failure of my thinking. So if I don't
Nobody
understand what
understands
freedom is,
how the world really works. So nobody is rational in that sense, and nobody has free will. Right? Nobody has perfect understanding of the world.
Well, in your view, that may be the case, not in mine. But yes, at least so long as you understand that insofar
That's a
as there is
pompous
a
view.
misalignment with reality, and there's a way in which people are trying to go against their own reality, which is the same way, it's like destroying yourself, thinking that that's what makes you free. That's like saying that a person who commits suicide is free because they got what they chose. They wanted to die. No, they're not. Clearly, the person who commits suicide, was being driven to suicide. People don't rationally choose out of nowhere. Oh, like I've decided, I just want to commit suicide. No, they're driven to there by despair. They're driven to that by bad conditions. So just random
Exactly, and
choices.
that's the case with every choice and every decision
No,
you
no,
make.
it's not the case with every choice. For example, when I told you about the immediate problem, the thing about immediacy, that when you think about immediacy, the only thing that is consequential to that, what it means is nothing. That's not some random choice. That's the consequence of what that really is. And if I follow that as that really is, what that does is it frees me up from illusion. It frees me up from wasting my time having, wrong ideas about the world, wrong ideas about how my own reasoning works, wrong ideas which lead me nowhere except pain and destruction. People who think that freedom is just choice end up in a lot of pain and destruction because they're like, oh, I have all these choices. One, I lack the motivation to choose anything. Two, I have choices and I don't know what to choose. And it's just arbitrary. And where's the freedom? Nowhere. Because their own thinking about it doesn't make any sense. It does not align with reality. You cannot be free and go against your own reality. That's just, that's worse than ignorance. The ignorant person, we can say, yes, they were unfortunate. Suppose, and by this I mean
Let
somebody
me put an
really ignorant.
example.
Okay.
Let me put a thought experiment. Okay, there's a person who lives in a very impoverished society and financially poor, and the culture is very violent, and that's the whole upbringing that his parents and the whole culture and the whole society gave him. Somehow he grows into a person who is considerably rational, but he has all these causal influences of his upbringing and stuff. And his genes are not that great either. He has genes which predispose him to violence and stuff, but he somehow had the fortune of going to school and having education and all that. So he is rational in most of the decisions he takes, but there is this thing hidden, this mixture of his nature and nurture, of being violent and of being unempathetic towards other people. All right. So, do you think that person has free will? Or do you think everything that he does has causal connections and he is not responsible for all that?
I don't think those two things are antithetical. I can admit that those things have all causal connections that impinge upon his will and that he also has a will. The will has to do with exactly what I said earlier, the way that I defined it. The will has to do with these purely rational cognitions like the good, beauty, truth, happiness, health, those kind of things. Now, you can be a really fucked up person. You can have a really fucked up background. Oh, and I'm sorry for cursing. I don't know if you want that on your channel.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a sailor's mouth. I got to work on it. So yeah, a person can have all those backgrounds.
No,
But
that's
okay,
fine.
so they may understand, for example, let's put it on not an extreme level. We'll make it more extreme later on. So let's say, and this happens in the U.S. The U.S. is a great example. We have a huge fat epidemic in the U.S. People know what is healthy and what is not healthy food. They choose, and then they want to medicalize and say, look, it's because like my parents were obese. I grew up in an obese household. I couldn't help myself. And then they're asked, well, did you know that was going to make you fat? And they're like, yes. Did you know that it was unhealthy? Yes. Did you choose to not abstain? And it's like, but I really, really wanted it. I really just love cheeseburgers or pizza or whatever, and I just can't help it. They're like, what do you mean you can't help it? Did you know it? That was bad? Yes. In the moment that you had the cravings, were you aware of the cravings? Yes. Did the cravings walk you to the store? No, I walked to the store. Did you like rationally deliberate and say like, this is unhealthy? I know it's unhealthy, but I fuck it. I'm gonna go do it. I'm gonna go eat the cheeseburgers and the pizza. I want to, I just want to have pleasure. That person
Yeah, you're
has free
not able
will.
to. But are you able to explain why that person chose to do so even after knowing this? That's because
Yes.
there are conditions that are controlling that mind of that
Yes.
person.
Yes. But
Other
the person
conditions that
knows.
that
So
person is not in control of.
right, right,
Yeah,
and that doesn't matter
knows.
actually. So in
But
my position,
what
that does
is
not
at
matter.
play here?
Okay, what is at
What
play
is
is
at
that the
play?
person knows. So what is
It's
at
not the
play is
person.
specifically. Yeah, no,
It's not the
well, for me, this is
consciousness of that
no, no.
person.
In my
It's the
position, this is what is
conditions
at
that
play.
are at play.
No, no, it's not the
Those
conditions.
conditions
Again,
are what
in
are
this.
determining what that person does,
No, they don't.
not the
Abishek,
person himself.
again, this person knows.
Despite being a rational person, she's not able to not choose that pizza.
No, she is able.
Why?
She knows. What do you mean she's not able?
She's
You
not
can't
able
make that
because
judge.
she
You cannot
didn't
make
choose
that
it.
judgment for them, Abishek. You cannot make that judgment for them. The question is, do they know, and did they rationally, knowing, it may be faulty reasoning, which it is. Obviously they're like, oh, I have pleasure. I want pleasure. I know it's bad, but I'm stupid. I just want the immediate pleasure. But they know the consequences, Abhishek. They know it's unhealthy. They know it's going to cause bad problems in the future. They still
But
did
they
it.
don't
You
know the
cannot.
conditions that are determining
They don't have to know the
what
conditions, Abhishek.
overwhelms,
They don't
which
have to know the
desire or reason
conditions.
overwhelms.
No, they don't
If
have
you
to know the
if they
conditions.
don't have to know the conditions, then I just don't agree with you.
No, look,
That's
in the
exactly
case,
what freedom should
no,
mean.
no, no. Like in this case, I'm assuming, and go ahead and correct me. I'm assuming the conditions you're talking about are the physical conditions. They don't have to know that.
The
What they have to
physiological
know is
conditions.
the immediate rational conditions. The person has to know
But the
why,
knowing of the
why
immediate
am I
rational conditions
incapable?
itself is determined.
No, not in this
Are
case.
you a
In this case,
determinist? Do you
case,
believe in determinism? I mean, at least for the sake of this debate, are you a determinist?
no, I'm explicitly not. I deny that is the structure of the will. I gave you that the structure of the will is a self-determining structure. So determinism is the other determining structure, not self-determining. So I'm not a determinist. I
Okay, so
involve structures of determinacy, but
it's
they
kind
are
of a
not
causa sui,
utterly
right?
determining. Yeah.
It's kind of a causa sui. So you're an agent causal libertarian, is it?
No. This position is not something you're going to find in any of the established literature. It is not a well-known position. It's mainly a position
Okay,
only found, as far as I know, in German idealism.
okay, what else? What do you add to rationality and reasoning that gives you this freedom?
Nothing. Rationality
Okay,
is itself
rationality
freedom.
itself.
Yeah,
Okay, that's
freedom.
what you're saying,
Rationality
right?
is itself an
That's what I
instant.
said. I didn't strawman you
Mhm.
earlier. I didn't strawman you. So rationality is
No.
what you're saying is freedom, and I disagree with that because
Well,
everything
no.
that
Like
you do.
again, let me finish. Rationality and being the exact same thing for me. Rationality is not just a representation or belief in my head. When I say somebody's being rational, is that they are acting in accordance with the actual structures of the world. So for somebody to be rational, is that they have to go in accordance with the consequences of the perfection of their own being. So somebody who's, eating unhealthily, being extremely overweight, consciously, it's one thing. For example, I will agree. I will give it to you. For example, if parents have a kid, and the parent is in control of the food, and the kid doesn't know what is healthy and what is not healthy. He just eats what the parent gives him, and they make him fat or her fat. Well, that person had no control. It was not their will whether they got fat or not. Somebody else made them. But there's a point in which that kid gains a level of rationality. Even in America, in America, we're not famous for being smart. Uh, but even in America, people are aware that it's unhealthy to eat all this junk food. They still do it anyways. Now, the desire, the physics did not walk itself to the store, to the McDonald's and buy it and gulp it down. The person did. The person who knows and who chose to do that. Now, you may say, but look, they have
Absolutely
a
not.
weak will.
Even weakness of the will is not example of free will. There is no free will in any situation. And
You have not established
I
that.
think
Okay, well, so like if I recall correctly, I don't know if you want to correct me on this. The will you established to be the capacity to choose otherwise. Yes?
capacity to choose otherwise, and that the decision itself is up to that person consciously.
Right. And I problematized, I showed the problems with this idea. One, you cannot choose otherwise. There is no reason to. If you chose otherwise, you'd be a different person. And which means that the freedom doesn't mean jack shit. It's just random. That's not freedom.
You're basically saying that even if the world is determined and it's only going to go one way, and reasons are only going to force you to do one action,
Reasons
that
cannot force
itself
you to
is
do anything.
freedom.
No, like,
Yeah.
okay, see, then, okay, here's the thing. You treat reason if it's not you. You are reason. Reason is not something
How
other
could I
to
be
you.
reason? I consider myself to be my consciousness, and I didn't create or choose all the conditions that are resulting in my consciousness.
So are you an operative agent at all? Or are you just pure observation?
See, I have a causal will, a will that is caused by other conditions. If you want to call me an agent that way, then yes, I can make voluntary decisions, rational decisions. Yes,
Um,
I was free to do that is a nonsense idea in economy.
I don't see how
I was
then,
not free
okay,
to do that.
if you're just your
It's the
consciousness,
metaphysics. It's the metaphysics of the world that determines whatever I do, not me.
yeah. So,
I'm
I mean,
constitutive of all of my brain and endocrinology, neuropsychology, and neurophysiology, all the genes. I am a product of all that. How can I be free if I didn't create or choose any of that? So that's the
well,
freedom I think that's worth. That's the freedom that we should work with if we want to build a society and if we want to develop a criminal justice system based on that freedom. That's the
well, I
kind of
disagree
freedom.
because that's
I
not freedom at
agree.
all. It's nonsense.
I agree. I agree that rationality exists, but the fact that one guy is rational is itself not under his control. It's because he's lucky or unlucky that is
No,
rational
it
or
is
not.
under people's control. It is under people's control.
Not at all.
Oh, yes, it is. Look, you can show the difference, and this is it's probably more noticeable in India than it is in the U.S. In the U.S., we don't value education. Most people just don't get it. You know, they don't get like why you should learn things and be rational.
Sorry, can you
So,
repeat that? Can you repeat that?
so somewhere in
I
India,
lost
you
you.
guys probably have in India you have a culture that's probably far more engaged with valuing education, where in the U.S. we don't.
No,
Eh,
no, I don't think so. I don't think so.
No? Okay, well, you live there, so you would know better than I do. It's just I
Yeah, I
generally
know. I
gotten more the
mean,
impression that you guys in general have a better appreciation of education. But anyways,
it's not as much
uh,
like that. I mean, you shouldn't conflate Indian philosophy or Indian theology or whatever with the people here. Okay, so we have 1.4 billion people here. The philosophy and philosophy is not the same as the people here. Okay, so the people
no,
here
I
are
was
just
talking
fucked up.
just on number wise. I mean, you guys make a lot of engineers and doctors and things, far more than we
Yeah, I
do.
think there's some bias going on there. It's just that the engineers and doctors who are created, you're gonna find them. Are you in the US?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you're gonna find them in US, for example. These guys are going out there, so it may feel like, oh, the Indians are very education centered and all, but no. Imagine the fact that we have 1.4 billion people out here, and only a few thousands would be going to the US or other places, or maybe maximum hundreds of thousands. But yeah, most of the people here, billions of people, are just stupid. Absolutely stupid. Shouldn't say that, but yeah.
Well, no, I mean,
Anyway,
like, you also just don't have the infrastructure. Your government is not doing a very good job, but
yeah, right.
yeah. But anyways, my point is actually,
And we are not
maybe
free.
earlier. Yeah, you are not free indeed.
Our
Just
politics and our whatever, all the system itself is forcing ourselves to be like this.
so,
Yeah,
perhaps
anyway,
China would be a better
yeah,
example, even though,
yeah,
it's always going to be the case that the
perhaps.
majority of people aren't, are pretty mid. But, that's just a standard. The point is,
Right.
perhaps now is not a very good time, but like in the past, to a certain
Mhm.
extent, both in, Latin America, the US, say in the last century, in the 1900s, there was actually just a general view among people, and this was general, that education was worth something. That education,
Oh.
aligned you not only for a better, job, which it does, but aligned you with
Mhm.
just a better cognizance of what reality is. And, smart people get ahead not only because, well, hey, they're smart. It's not an abstract smartness. The smartness has to do with what is reality. If I know what reality actually is, I can actualize my will. And if I can actualize my will to the highest degree, I know the reality of my own reason. I know how I think and why I think the way I think. And that this is a specific certain kind of way, because it is. There is
I
actually really
disagree
only.
there, but
Yeah, you
yeah,
can
please
disagree.
continue.
Yeah. So, to that, there is a specific kind of way that this is. The fact that I can't go against that is not an unfreedom. The fact that I can't go against that is no more than the fact that, obviously, why would I want to go against that? Anybody rational, anybody who's cognizant about what the world is and who they are and how they think and how they know the world, would want to maintain the capacity to be and know in the world, to actualize one's will in the world. Your example of being unable to go against the truth and treating that as if it's an imposition, seems to me to only come from a view in which you are not an agent. Because, when you say, like, I am not my thinking, I am my consciousness, you step back from the agential process. Because what is the agential process other than my cognition, which separates things, analyzes them, synthesizes them, judges them? If I am not that, then yes, I will agree with you that you are
Yeah.
not free. But you are not free not because you cannot act upon anything, including your thoughts. No, you're not free because you don't exist. According to your,
Acknowledge
like,
what you
that view
said.
of metaphysics.
See, rationality and all that you said, I agree with, in the sense that there's a difference between rational and irrational, voluntary and involuntary choices that we make. But neither rationality nor involuntariness gives us freedoms. So even if you're rational, it's because of processes outside of your control.
That's
Don't
not true.
consciously choose. That
That's not
is
true.
that is what is true.
No, that's
That's
not true.
true.
I gave you the
The reason
example
why
of
I say that.
immediacy. Let me give you the example. So again, back to immediacy.
Okay,
So if
okay.
I think
You can
immediacy,
give that one more time. Yeah.
yeah. So
I'll have to
if I give you,
go for my lunch after that.
all right, yeah. So let me just be real
Yeah.
quick. So if I give you immediacy, there's a consequence that the meaning of that, the understanding of it, on the operation of meaning is it's nothing. I can't think actually. The reason it's nothing is because thinking cannot happen. Thinking needs relationships. Thinking needs mediations, and thinking looks out, tries to get a mediation, and hey, there's nothing there. There's an absence. So it lacks its own self. In turning back, it immediately goes, wait, there's nothing. Thinking is not there. Thought is not there. But now the nothing, the absence, is itself a thought. So I go from a thinking of an immediately, there's another immediate, which is the absence. I notice that immediacy again, and it's the same immediacy as the first. And I'm stuck in a cycle between, what is immediately there and what is immediately not there. And I'm stuck in that. And I can go one level higher again. And I'm like, wait, this is a process. I go from what is the presence to the absence. But what the absence is present. So it's present. But what is present is absence. So it's absent. Present, absence, in circle. This is not, you cannot tell me, Abishek, this is a physical process. You cannot tell me you can comprehend this in any physical way. There is no way anything physical could have such a determination at
We
all.
might not be able to comprehend it, but it doesn't mean that there is no physical explanation to that. It
No, it
sounds
does
like
mean.
argument from incredulity to me.
No, it's not
It's
incredulity.
just an
We
argument
know.
from incredulity. Yeah.
No, Abishek, in
No.
this case, I know exactly why I think what I think. You are the one who's arguing
That's the
from
illusion of
your
free will.
incredulity. That's not the illusion.
No, that's the illusion of free will.
No, that's not in the illusion of free will. This is actually before that.
Illusion of
This
knowing
is
knowing why you're thinking what you're thinking is
Abishek,
exactly
you
an
can't, you
illusion.
cannot say that. I could say that,
Antonio,
but you
listen.
cannot.
Listen. Can you think your thoughts before you think them? Right. You can't. You
Well,
can't
that has nothing
think
to
your
do with
thoughts
it.
before you think them. It
Yeah, that
has
has
to
nothing
do
to
with
do
it
with it.
because freedom, you have to have that ability to think thoughts before you think them.
In that
That's what
case,
I'm saying.
yes. Yes, actually, Abishek, yes. That's what the immediacy thing
can't.
reveals. In thinking immediately, I have thought nothing. And this has happened consequent prior to, logically, what I have initially thought. So that in my immediate thinking of presence, the pre-thinking of the absence is already present in it. I have already thought the absence before I even thought it. And it was only revealed to me after the fact of me going through it, in the very process going through it. So if you want to go to that, yes. Yes, I do pre-think my thoughts.
No, you actually, that's the illusion of free will that I'm talking about.
That is not an
Every
illusion.
thought
That is a fact.
Every thought that pops into our consciousness is a result of background causes that we are not aware of and we are not in control of.
You say
And
that
so
again.
are counter thoughts. Like you're talking about absence and presence. All those thoughts and counter thoughts, intentions and counter intentions, desires and counter desires, all are a result of this background processes, one after the other, causal
Do you
chain.
know that?
Absolutely.
No, you
There's
don't.
neuroscientific evidence.
No, that's not knowledge. See, in all of that, you're assuming, Abhishek, that your reason has anything to do with reality. Do you know that? Or have you just
I don't
assumed that?
even have to go
Yes, you
to
do.
science for that. Yeah, I don't have to go to science for that. You can experience that yourself.
Experience is not what I'm asking about. Experience does not say anything. People experience illusions all the time. You could be experiencing an
So what
illusion
I'm
about your
saying is
knowledge.
that even subjectively and objectively, thoughts are not created by you. It's a
You do
process
not
of the
know that.
brain.
You do not know that.
It depends on what you mean by you. For me, you is just consciousness. Consciousness is the vessel where all thoughts arise, all desires arise, rather than they're created there. The creation
Right.
process and the creation
so
process and all the methodology by which that is produced, that's happening in the background, and we are not doing anything to control that.
Well, yeah.
We are just witnessing all the thoughts.
Yeah, from your
As a slave.
perspective, from that metaphysics, you cannot actually say you know anything. All you can say is you have experience. That experience does not constitute a knowledge of anything. And the thoughts, the reasoning you're undergoing, which is not your
Knowledge
reasoning.
can still make sense. You're not free to have that knowledge, but knowledge makes sense. Justified
No, it
true
doesn't.
beliefs does make sense.
No, it doesn't.
Even
Like in
though
the
you're not
case,
free to believe otherwise.
in the case, in your own tradition, you have, somebody like, what's his name? Nagarjuna, a skeptic.
Mhm.
He shows no. You don't just get to say it makes sense because it actually doesn't make sense. When you are forced to ultimate justification, you will not be able to make sense of it. So you cannot claim that you know. So this story you're telling about the metaphysics of, everything's physical and there's some causal chain. You don't know that. You may believe that. You tell yourself that story, but you don't know that. Now, from my perspective, I will tell you, I'm going to make a grand claim here.
I might not know that with absolute certainty. I might
You don't
not
know that at all. You don't know that at all.
You can't say that you don't know that at all. We have
No, you don't know that.
Like percentage. We can give them percentages. What do you say?
Abishek, you can't. You definitely cannot do
Most
percentages.
probably or almost certainly. true.
No, no, absolutely
If you
not.
don't believe that,
Abhishek.
then there's no knowledge. Like you said,
Yeah, exactly.
if
For
you
you,
want,
there is no
if you
knowledge.
want knowledge, if you think you should have absolute certainty for it, then we don't have any knowledge at all.
Yeah,
Right.
you indeed have
Talk
no
about
knowledge.
epistemology.
Because
Oh wow.
Abhishek, in order to say you have a probability, Abhishek, you must know the totality. It's like saying, I know the chance of the dice of the
I agree.
universe
Okay,
rolling
if you want to
on
go
a
there,
face.
if you want to go there, I agree that we don't know anything with absolute certainty. 100% certainty is just
No, you
impossible,
don't know anything at all.
epistemologically speaking.
You don't know anything at all. You can't say you know even a fraction.
That's what you're saying. All right.
Yeah.
I might not know. Neither do you. Do you? Do you?
I will
You
claim
don't
actually
either.
I will claim I actually do.
That's a really pompous view, and you don't have
It
valid
is.
arguments, sound
Well,
arguments for
okay,
that.
Abhishek. Well, this
You don't
discussion
even
was
have
not about
evidence
that.
for that.
Well, no, Abhishek, this discussion was not about that. But I do have
I
arguments.
know, yeah.
I do have arguments.
That's a really
It's a very
braggart
pompous
view. How
thing.
do you
Yes,
call
it is a big
it?
brag, but I will claim it. For those of you who may be interested in looking up that up, the basis of this comes from a really big book called The Science of Logic by Hegel.
Okay.
So, anyways, you said
That's
you
a
had to
whole
go.
different
So,
world out there.
yeah, it's a whole
Hegel
different
and
ball
stuff.
game.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it's a whole different kind of logic,
Yeah.
Abhishek. So it's not even
I will
working on
get to
formal
that.
logic.
I will get to Hegel in the future, maybe, but let me finish my metaphysics, free will, and stuff.
Yeah.
Then I'll get to God, perhaps, and then we can get to Hegel. While
Oh no,
I'll
yeah.
be a bit older.
I have thoughts on God, which are also counterintuitive to most things. I would doubt that you've ever
Okay.
even heard something like what I have. So we can discuss that some
All
other
right.
time as well.
Absolutely.
Anyways, I
Absolutely.
hope you had a good time. I had a good time.
Absolutely. This was my first ever debate in my whole life. If you might not believe that, but yeah, that's true. And
Yeah, I mean,
I
I
had
don't
so
consider a
much
debate.
fun.
I consider a discussion.
Yeah, not a debate, discussion, or whatever. But yeah, this is the first time I'm doing this, and it feels really good. And
Yeah. It's fun to
I'm
discuss these
very
things.
lucky to have been able to talk with you, Antonio. 2 more conversations coming up in the future.
Sure. Yeah. Let me know if you want
And yeah,
to discuss something else.
it was fun. Absolutely. How did you like, and did you like discussion?
I mean, I enjoyed it. I have fun. I wanted to just kind of more expound my view, since my view is unorthodox. It's definitely not something you'll find normally. I doubt you'll find anybody else who ever
Sure.
talks about this stuff like I do.
Mhm.
So I
We can
understand
talk
the
about that some
incredulity. It's big claims. I understand. So I'm not bothered by the fact that you don't accept it willy nilly. You shouldn't.
Just like some wise person said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I will ask for those evidence in some other
And in
future
philosophy,
conversations.
in philosophy, Abhishek, extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary work. So
Right.
work both to present and work to understand.
I agree with that.
But all right, I guess
Anyways,
we'll leave it there.
yeah, sure. Nice talking to you, Antonio.
Yeah, very nice chat.
More future conversations. It's really fun talking to you.